Good afternoon.
Hey.
Hey,
Hi. Mhm.
hey, it's Dawn Gardner. I'm excited about this week's podcast discussion. Welcome, Camryn and Sheree. How you doing?
Doing
Hey.
good.
Yeah, doing
Awesome.
well. It's a good Saturday.
Yeah, it is. I am excited that we could get together today with everyone's busy schedules.
Yeah.
We're gonna go ahead and get started. I have been enjoying the weekly readings and really have been learning some interesting things about other things and myself when it comes to listening to other storytelling. In chapter one, Matt talked about the idea of the soundbite method of journalism storytelling that we see often now reinforces existing stereotypes because the framing can be incomplete. It's um it's widely acknowledged that the media can be a double-edged sword. It can reproduce stereotypes, also combat stereotypes. When this happens, the actual message I feel of the story can be lost if not told
Mm.
properly, especially in today's politically charged environment. What are your thoughts, ladies?
I think that's huge to bring up. I think even in my personal life, thinking about kind of sound bites where you hear somebody telling any kind of story, just like about something that happened, and then she said this, and it's like, well, you're not getting the full context of how it was situated, and maybe the framing is different depending on how what the story content is and how the person telling you what their goals kind of with sharing that story are. So thinking about even when I hear like my family retelling something that I said and I hear them tell it, and thankfully I'm there to say, well, that's not what I meant. But thinking
Yes.
about kind of how that gets misconstrued in the media, I think is huge. And then thinking about whose sound bites are used versus whose, because I mean, the news has to be entertaining to a degree. So it's kind of like that idea of, are they going to use the most sensational one rather than the one that should be used? Those are my
Of
just first thoughts after you ask that.
What immediately what comes to my mind is the telephone game. Like if you've
Yeah.
ever played that where you start out telling a simple story and then by the time it gets back to you, it's not even anything like you started. It has
Hmm.
all these details or like I said, and then I feel like that really can distort the message of the actual story because we don't know as listeners what it builds skepticism.
Yeah,
Right.
no, exactly.
I think you gave a good example with the telephone game. I just thought about that. I remember playing that, and when whatever the first thing was, when it got to the end, it was always something something different. So I think just uh, telling a story for what it is and not adding things to make it more entertaining um, is important too.
Sheree,
Exactly.
that, I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Cameron.
That
I'm sorry.
brings up another reading or video that we kind of looked into. I think it was this week, with, or was it last week, with the trolls and bullies in the library that
Yeah.
Dr. Cook spoke on.
Mhm.
Thinking about the story that one of the librarians was telling about her experiences with a patron, and then how it was misconstrued by someone else in and I think it was a security guard, and he was white and the woman and the patron were both black, and thinking about how he used a soundbite but put his own stereotypes and assumptions on how
Mhm.
that interaction was going into that. And,
Right.
and I think that if she wasn't present to be like, well, that's not how I perceived it, and I was, the one involved, wondering how that might have gone differently for the patron, if that was clear. I don't know.
Yes, I
Mhm.
feel like too something that recently has been in the headlines is that the controversy between Dawn Staley and the Gamecocks and BYU. And some background information on that is that Dawn Staley decided before the season's even started that she's not going to play BYU because BYU had an incident with Duke University with a volleyball game. And BYU players were accused of, and the audience was accused of shouting racial slurs to
Oh
the
wow.
Duke University players. And when Dawn Staley heard that, she made an announcement that they were going to ahead not play. They're not going to go ahead and play BYU because of the atmosphere, and she was protecting her players and her integrity.
Right.
She was like, we're not going to do that. And so BYU did in its supposed investigation, and I do my best air quotes, and said that they didn't find any of that to be true, but BYU did an investigation. So Dawn Staley decided, she was like, well, I still believe the Duke University player, and I still
Yeah.
believe this, she was passionate, as in their perception was this really happened, and it, for more than purposes, it probably did. But BYU, they're like, oh, this didn't happen. We can't collaborate it. So again, I feel like it it depends on the situation, but that's another example of how stories can be just, construed. So I'm sure one side of the media, the right, was playing it like one way, and I'm sure the other side, the left, is playing it a different way. So it's just it's the same story, just it's how you paint it to people.
Yes.
I feel like that leads us into our second question about oral histories. Um, So with oral histories, I feel like it's a very powerful way to tell stories. Um, but I also feel like one of the weaknesses of oral history is that some people can be skeptical about oral histories, as if because they question the human memory, how valid it is. Did it really happen? And I feel that if you already have a strong opinion about a specific subject, those weaknesses are really magnified, even though the story probably is true. But if you already in your mind thinking, oh, this did not happen, you're going to not even be able to learn from the story because you already think that the story never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts you'd like to add on that?
Yeah,
Well,
I
in my
think.
work,
Oh,
I'm
you go.
sorry. With my work, I go and visit homes with parents with little ones, and sometimes, like I have a couple situations where it's like the grandparent has custody, and that type of thing. So I get to hear stories about their thoughts of the actual parent and their struggles, and um, a lot of times is the parent is on drugs, and I have to listen without judgment. And I think that's a important aspect of oral histories, like listening to someone else's story and like learning to do that. I think we help them feel better. We help them feel free. We help them, just to be able to express themselves or whatever. So, but yeah, I think that's a strength in oral history, like just allowing people just to talk, just to share what they're going through.
I
That's really.
absolutely love oral histories, and I mean, my father was a living testament of that. He would talk about his time in Vietnam to me, and I
Mm-hmm.
learned more about his time and what went on because he told it so eloquently. He told it, and I felt like I was there, and I really learned a lot about him. And I felt like there was a lot I didn't even know about my own father. Um, and I grew up with him. He lived with me in the same household, and the more I discover, even after his death, about, because I found some of his journals. They may not be oral because he didn't record them, but he wrote them down, and his words really helped me learn how it was like, what they faced, the adversities, being a U.S. soldier, and then coming back. And he would always say that he would love when it would be, he was older, when it was a Veterans Day, because now everybody goes crazy about Veterans Day. But when he came
Mm-hmm.
back from the war, he said he's had paint thrown on him, and he was cussed at and told he was a baby killer and stuff like that. Because back then it wasn't a love fest about people that were in the military. So that's why he really started only trying, basically only enjoyed that when he was in the 60s, compared to when he was actually serving as a service member.
Yeah.
I think this makes me think of, and this is kind of situated within my experience too. I grew up in like rural Appalachia in Virginia, and I have family in West Virginia who work in the coal mines, and thinking about the stories that I hear from my family members who, are doing the heavy lifting, and then how that compares to how the mines are discussed in the news, and how the people who are in operations of the mines and who hold and discuss the narrative, and they kind of hold this power over how it's talked about, because it is the industry there, and in a place that like maybe doesn't have the economic prosperity that other states do. And I think it's really interesting. It makes me think about, I mean, in that context, it's who holds the power when you're thinking about money, and I have a sociology background, so who owns the means of production.
Mhm.
And things like that. And you're thinking about how what I hear at the Thanksgiving table is so different from how it's covered in the media, until there's some kind of crisis where a
Mhm.
mine collapses or something safety concern arises. But
There's a big
tragedy.
backlash. Uh,
Yeah. So,
there's also a big backlash about mining because of fossil fuels
yeah.
and environment. And so I feel like, unfortunately, although everybody wants to have clean air, it's almost vilified people that work in the mines.
Mhm.
And then you think about the situations of where people are living, and what kind of benefits individuals can get. It's kind of like that individual versus organizations or corporations, and placing the blame on an individual rather than, yeah. So I think that that's one of the benefits of oral history, that I feel thankful to have the perspectives of my cousins and family members, and kind of how would that story look to me differently without hearing their voices. So it makes me think about whose story is able to be told, and whose is like amplified the most at all. So
Yeah, the most squeakiest wheel usually gets the most attention.
hmm.
So if they don't have a, I mean, think about it. If you don't have an actual platform, you know, there's a lot that you don't know, but yet they want to say, they would love to tell you, but they don't feel like people don't have the platform to let people know. So you don't know. It's like you're going through with blinders on.
I
Mhm.
kind of feel like that's where social media comes in sometimes too, where I know we don't believe everything we read on there, but I think a lot of times people will post those long personal stories, and it's kind of like an expose. And because of the platforms, it can be shared. But I
Mhm.
think there are issues with that too. But that when you said that, it made me think, well, where can those stories be spread? And that just was the first thing.
I definitely agree. I feel like that I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I
Mm,
absolutely love it because I feel like that it really does open you to a lot of things. I found some family members that I never knew existed because of social media that I would have
hmm.
never probably found, like some lost cousins and stuff. I found actually that I had a sister that I didn't know I had. So social media is positive about that. I feel like it has a very powerful impact in bringing awareness to key elements um, of social justice. I feel like that a lot of things we're seeing and we're such an uproar now about, like, for instance, like um the George Floyd situation. If that would have been recorded, think about how powerful that is. When you see something like an act like that, there's no denying video. It's, the proof's in the pudding. You're looking at it, you're seeing it. um I feel like social media really can help the cause of social justice, bringing a message to a larger audience who might not
Hmm.
have had the opportunity to receive them. But and that being said, like the Instagram page about the favorite librarian in our readings, it
Yeah.
highlights culture and a diverse reading selection of materials. When you're I know I'm working currently as a librarian, so and I do some social media on my Twitter, but I kind of watch what I post because again, they're looking at our district is looking at what we post. But do you plan to utilize an aspect of social media to bring awareness to books or stories from marginalized communities when you are a librarian?
I definitely do. I get it. Like I said earlier, like I work as a home visitor, so I get really excited about books that represent our families in a new way. I have some Asian families, and they are just really passionate about learning, and so I'm always trying to find new books that represent their culture. So yeah, I definitely would, I think, um advertise, or I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, post about different books on social media.
I noticed that okay, so my school district is Richland 1. We have 50 schools. Our school district spans from the rural areas of Eastover, South Carolina, all the way to like downtown, right near the State House,
Mm,
and USC Stadium and Benedict. And so I think it for me, I've seen, and we're like I said, we have a librarians group in our district, and we kind of some of the librarians, we all chat on the library listserv, and some of our librarians in our more affluent areas have had books challenged and
mm,
things challenged that are in their libraries. And it was because some of the stuff they had been posting on social media was anything, not anything negative. It was just bringing awareness. Um, and so, and it kind of caught the librarians off guard. And then next thing you know, we started getting questions about what do you do if you get a challenge book and stuff like that.
Mm,
So I feel like the social media aspect, although yes, it's great to have a big, to push the schools to give parents a way to access information from Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. But then I feel like some utilize that for negative. I feel like some like it could be misconstrued. You can take a screenshot and like it's like what we spoke about earlier. It's only part of the story,
yeah,
whole story, or you're making assumptions about stuff that you might not know and have all the facts from. So I feel like that's what's caused me to be more neutral in my approach because I'm treading lightly not to make waves for my because I know what my administration expects, and then I know what our school district expects, so they'll back us up. But we just have to make sure. I want to make sure that I'm being respectful to all parties involved.
right.
So, with that being said, um, I know, like I said, social media, it's it kind of leads me to my next question of related to the article. It was like a fever, why people protest. Um, so the article stated, why do activists often protest this? Why do activists so often protest that sprung from the head of Zeus, ignoring or downright denying the planning that preceded? I see that as I think it's easy to make the connections of how protesting can be, like I said, like a fever, like an infectious thing. You see something and you want to take charge, and it's definitely easier to stand up with more than one instead
Mm,
of standing up by yourself. And so I see that lots of people only see the end result, not the actual planning experience, because I feel like some activists don't want to take away from the actual movement or cause itself. Like they don't. And plus, there's also um, the thing that if you're the front face of a movement, now it seems like the pattern and trend is for the opposite side to go and dig up any kind of dirt or anything that would be negative that you've done or just to support their narrative. So I feel like it's a catch 22. So I know the founders of Black Lives America or Black Lives Matter have been under scrutiny for how they've spent money in the right wing media, and that's
mhm.
I'm registered Democrat, but I've started looking at both sides so that way I know to be prepared with the argument from the other side. I want to know what the talking points are, so that way I can feel like and do my research and come back with facts to support why I feel my way. I feel like I need to know the argument they're making. So that was one of the arguments about, oh, they misspent money. And so again, here they're doing all this good, but they pick out the one negative thing. So
Mm-hmm.
have a thought on that?
It makes me think of, and this was mentioned a little bit in the article, but mentioned the sociology part of me. I took a class in my undergrad. There was a sociology of social movements, kind of how they form and how I think we call it social movement fatigue, which I think we see a lot with people, especially younger generations on social media, trying to care about so many um, causes at one time, but thinking about why activists who organize events make them seem like they're this spontaneous, spurious event. In the article, it was talked about maybe a lasting history from um, this way to keep protest looking um, like a homegrown, spur of the moment, I think are the words they used to keep people from assuming that the movements were controlled or influenced by outsiders who in the past during the Red Scare were communists.
Mhm.
And thinking about how the more pre-planned something looks, I think it can almost create a narrative of infiltration or maybe a culture of that where you maybe open yourself up and it becomes a vulnerable organizational tactic when you're trying to engage members of your community. um, I'm not sure if this is the first time I've tried to vocalize this, so I hope it's clear, but
No, I totally get that because it makes me think back of when I did my story journal last week on the documentaries piece, and I picked Katrina babies.
mm,
And so and it really showed that basically the documentary was about kids that grew up in Katrina and the negative effects it had on the Black community. And and the outside from the outside, I go, oh, they just didn't want to leave. Well, no, they didn't have the resources to leave, so it wasn't like they could just pick up and go. That was, they didn't have the money to travel, they didn't have anywhere to go, there wasn't anything in place. So I feel like that when the media did show things, they showed people running into stores, taking TVs, taking this,
mhm,
taking that. And so, of course, it was painted out, oh, you just want to loot. When
Mm-hmm.
really you're not sending pictures of the people stuck on the roofs or clinging to logs or being
Right.
rescued. You're showing the negative thing.
you could see
So
that from the summer of
um,
2020 too.
mhm. Yeah, oh yeah, from all the protests. Um, and I feel like that again, it goes back to that social media piece. It could be a double-edged sword. Like one thing you're showing um pot, so if it's your side, of course you're going to show stuff that's going to back up your side. Very rarely would you see, to me, like, and this is because I'm a nerd and I like politics, very rarely are you going to go to Fox News and see anything positive about Barack Obama or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? Like it just seems like they always go after like Black Lives Matter and the
Mhm.
protests and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Very rare. Like I don't even think that maybe it's ever happened. Um, and so because you're gonna post about your narrative. And so I feel like that's where it's challenging for us being new librarians because we have multiple issues facing us, challenge books and um the things about the school system, like school boards, contentious school board elections. I know in my district and the district that my kids go to, they have a hotly contentious school board race. They're bashing each other left and right. And I was like, I don't even know who to
Mm-hmm.
vote for. So, um, so I know I probably got a little bit of a tangent, but I just feel like that um, that's something that I don't know how we're gonna tackle, but I feel like it's definitely going to be a challenge.
Mm.
Sheree, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have something to say?
Oh no, I was just listening to you.
Sorry.
Mm.
Uh, Okay. So, um, let's move on and let's go ahead and I know I had mentioned documentaries. So documentaries can be a very powerful way to tell a story. And I feel like they go hand in hand with oral histories. How do you think documentaries and other firsthand testimonials can really lead to changing mindsets um, of people that may not have the same mindset while educating others about privileges in the journey in the quest for social justice? So I'll start with that. Like, when I was saying I'm learning stuff about myself, I didn't realize I had, and I admit I didn't realize I know the field is dominated by white women. I did not have any idea that how marginalized communities, how little people are in the field of librarianship when it comes to black and people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I didn't realize the fact too that there were some things that I take for granted. And then again, I recognize that as that, okay, I've had a lot more opportunities and privileges, even though, on the outside, oh, I'm not privileged. Well, no, you realize you do have some things that we don't, I do have some things that I never thought that to even think about, like um, things, and that leads toward feeling safe because that kind of leads um, to feeling safe. And I want to feel safe and I want everybody to feel safe. And I feel like that some people have to go through daily life and not feel safe. And I feel like that gets traumatizing for somebody while keeping everything together. So, how do you feel documentaries, firsthand testimonials can lead to changing the mindset and recognizing your own privilege?
At first, it makes me think of maybe a weakness of documentaries. And this also, I'm a person that loves memoirs. They're one of my favorite things to read. But while you were asking the question and kind of sharing, it made me think about the ones that I've read or watched recently. And I think that the content and the media, related to documentaries and memoirs, which I just kind of see as the written version sometimes of documentaries, um, and that I engage with ones that I am probably engage with at night. I tend to only watch ones that um, I feel like are in alignment with my views, and maybe I'm learning more about a topic, but it's something that I already care about before I go into it. So I wonder if it's one of the pros and cons of long term or long form versus short form media, where I'd probably be more able or willing to watch a 10-15 minute maybe TED talk or some kind of YouTube video about a content area that maybe I'm not as well versed in, or is outside of my normal viewing patterns, I guess is where I'm trying to say, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, we tend to lean to what we are interested in.
Yeah, so I
Mhm.
wonder if that limits kind of the benefits to social justice and social movements, because we tend to engage with things we already agree with, but that's
That's
based on my own
why
experience.
I
So
I totally agree. That's why only until recently, when I said I listened to both sides is because I didn't wanna listen to both sides. I'll be completely honest. I was like, "I'm not listening to Fox News and the right," but then I started was like, well, I felt like that I needed to know the argument. I need to know what the issues are,
mm,
that from their side, so that way I feel like I can make my better argument and bring us together with the goal, you know, to help better mankind and instead of just bickering, because like we teach our students like, listen to, when they work in groups, one of the main things when collaboration is you don't have to agree, but you have to be respectful and listen. And then that way you can make your point and then move on. But I feel like that's like what today's narrative is that You draw the line in the sand. I'm on this side, you're on that side. And if you're this, you're this. If you're that, you're that. And as a parent, I want my children to be a little bit more well-rounded than I was and try to stretch out of your comfort zone and try to listen so that way we can work together.
Right. I love documentaries. Me
I
personally.
Yes.
Like, and I will watch something that I don't know much about. But recently I watched a documentary about where I live in Orangeburg. It's on YouTube,
Oh,
and it's called Meltdown in Dixie. And
ooh.
it's about there was an ice cream shop like right across the street from one of like it's a small town, but one of the like town's major attractions, this big garden. Um and there is a Confederate flag that flies right by
I know.
this.
Okay, I remember
Yeah.
that. Yes.
Yes. So a lot of people come to Orangeburg to this garden, and so when they see that, knowing that our town is like what, like 70% black.
And you
So
have two historically black colleges and universities.
yes, and we have two historically black colleges. So, like this girl did a documentary on this flag, and the people that own the property refused to take it down. So it's still there today, and it ran the little ice cream shop out of business.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, but I love, documentaries, and I feel like um that documentary in particular is like educating people about what happened there, because people wouldn't go to the ice cream shop because they thought that the ice cream shop had something to do with the Confederate flag being there, but they had nothing to do with the
I
flag
didn't
is
even know that. I
flying.
thought it was their flag.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
So it's like a little piece of property. It's like point something
Mm.
that the flag flies on. It's like some type of monument or something. So it's next to or it's in like the parking lot of that ice cream shop or whatever. But
Mhm.
I felt like that was a really good documentary that let people know that, okay, let people know what was really going on. So, but
It kind of reminds me of the kind of similar to the whole. I'm from the north, even though I have a southern accent now, but
mm,
but coming from Maryland, moving to South Carolina, and I remember that there used to be the Maurices everywhere, and there's still Maurices and the Confederate
mhm,
flag and all that, and and I know when I would come down here to visit my husband's family, um, they, like I said, Maurice's had good food, but we all
mhm,
made an agreement we weren't gonna go there because they put the flags everywhere. And then when they took the flag down after the Charleston 9, my husband and my daughter and my son and myself went there when they took the flag down to witness that. And there were people that were actually protesting from the other side. They were like, it's heritage and this, that, and the other. And it got pretty heated out
I
there.
believe it.
See the trauma of looking around, you can see how emotional people were. I remember seeing this man, he was an African American man, he was crying when they took
Yeah.
the flag down. And it kind of makes me think of the article Grief Can Transform Us.
Mm,
When McDaniels writes about how detrimental grief can be to one's mental health, and then she goes on to describe grief can not only be from death, but it can be from not feeling safe. She was grieving, not feeling safe to the point where she even contemplated suicide because of she was feeling like every time she turned around a corner, there would be something racist, or she would have something that would happen, and to the point where it was just affecting her. Um, so I feel like that. How do you see grief and past traumas affecting the journey of social justice?
Maybe I
um,
can jump. Oh, sorry, Sheree.
go ahead. Go ahead.
This maybe thanks connects the documentary question with this one too. I was a student in Charlottesville during the August 11th and 12th attacks. I don't know if y'all were familiar with
Yes.
those.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a really interesting time to be up there, and I think that um, seeing the way that that has been portrayed in documentaries since then, I think maybe it corrects some of the misperceptions about who was participating in what I would call a terrorist attack, maybe, if you can be that
If I remember
candid.
correctly, a girl died.
Yes, Heather
Yes.
Heyer.
Mm-hmm. But that's why, like I said, I love, like Sheree said, I love documentaries. And I feel like I need to challenge myself to watch more documentaries that's, like I said, maybe don't align with my views, just so I know, kind of like where people are coming from. So, because I feel like that if we don't know, then we can't make any progress. And it just, like I said, but I really do feel like that grief affects us in all different ways. And when I saw that man crying, and I was like, well, why is he crying? And I'm thinking, and I didn't realize how emotional it would be, and then listening to others as, and he was like, he's waited his whole life for that thing to come down.
Well,
And
that's kind of like the origins of, I mean, that was the people kind of descended on Charlottesville in opposition to the taking down of a Confederate statue. But I was also in Charlottesville in the 2020 era, and as a student there, participating in the Black Lives Matter marches and protests. You could see the community's grief from the death of Heather Heyer, and the way that August, like 2017 and August, how that impacts kind of the future of social justice and movements there. And I think it's something that the community is still attempting to heal from, but there's a lot of weight that's put on local activists. Like Miss Bryant is one of them that she's huge in our sphere, and she just is such a powerful voice in that community. And it's kind of, and she spearheaded the movement to get the statue removed. And I think you could see so much of the hesitation. I don't know if that's the word, but there was almost this fear ingrained in the BLM protests that it wasn't all on foot, that there were different options for participating. I think for people's inclination for safety and things like that. So it's really interesting to think of how a community can grieve the death of a community member who was fighting for the rights, like the good side.
yes,
But like how it transforms future movements too. And I think it's something that to this day the community is still so hyper aware of. But that was kind of a long-winded answer. Thank you for listening. But
Well, when I think about grief, just recently I learned that it's like stages to grief when we're going through it. And I think they are denial, depression, anger. I can't think of all of them, but I know those are at least three of
I
them. Denial,
describe it
anger.
as roller coaster coming from, because grief before 2020. I mean, I had grief. I
Mm,
mean, I've lost people, but I just only thought grief was when you lose someone.
right.
And so after 2020 of losing my dad and mother-in-law 2 days apart to COVID, I was thrown onto the grief. I described it as an upside down roller coaster. It just wouldn't get off.
Mm,
And then I kind of let my guard down a little bit. I mean, of course, things come around. You never know when the grief roller coaster is going to go up a hill. So a few months later, my mother was diagnosed with cancer and unexpectedly passed away. So back I was upside down. I'm doing loops at this
yeah.
point. So I was under the impression that grief again was just about, oh, you lose somebody. And then when I've seen students that are grieving for, we had a student that they're they were removed from their family because of something that's happened at home, and they are now staying with a family member. Well, the children are still coming, but of course they're still coming to that school, but they grieve the normalcy that they have,
Yeah.
daily routines. We've seen a drop in grades and their behaviors. Like, we've had to get the behavioral interventionists involved, and they are grieving for the life that
Mhm.
they had.
I
And
see
again,
Right.
that with COVID too.
mhm,
Mhm. Mm.
I don't know about you, but in the past, this school year, we have seen, our school especially has seen an influx of students with emotional problems.
Yeah.
We have fifth, to the point where even we have fifth grade boys, kids that are crying. They don't want to come to school, or not
Mhm.
just fighting, crying or running out the class. Anybody looks at them, they think they're looking at them the wrong way. They're ready to cuss them out. So I mean, like, I don't.
Yeah.
We're like, we had some of those instances, but we have an influx. Especially what we really notice is the early childhood, pre-K and kindergarten,
Mhm. Yep.
lot of issues. And what do you know? Those are the COVID babies. I mean,
Mm.
that's where they didn't get that interaction to be able to speak daily, you know. And when we did or learning, some of the kids like didn't come on or whatever. So that's where I feel that we're gonna have a long tab to pay for that for years.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, because if you think about, if I'm grieving and I'm acting out of grief, like
Mhm.
say I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm acting out of that grief. Um, just like in that article, she was ready to commit suicide. She was acting out of grief.
I had to read that twice to make
Yeah,
sure I
I did too.
yes. Because I was like, "Oh my gosh," like,
Mhm.
and then that's why I said I was learning stuff about myself, because, I mean, again, for the longest, I just said grief is when you lose someone. No, grief could be you're grieving for the life you had, the
Right.
normal. I see that in my own child who was grieving. Of course, they've lost 3 grandparents in less than a year, but,
Mhm.
where I really have seen it were my 2 oldest boys, who were when I went to school for my undergrad, my mother basically helped raise them while I went through and finished my degree, and I went through a divorce, and so they were really rocked when they
Yeah.
lost my parents, and so, and it affected them to the point where my son had to ask me for help, and
Yeah.
that really rocks you as a parent. So, but then
Mm.
you have students that are doing the same thing. You could be you're grieving for an experience, you're grieving for the family you had, you're grieving for your house. We had a student that lose their house in a house fire. Now they're in a hotel. So
Mhm.
grief can really affect, and then it makes me think again of that man standing there, just emotional.
Mm.
Like some people don't tell their stories because I feel like they're afraid of what is going to unravel in themselves.
Thinking about the way that stories can kind of resonate with different people, I think grief is probably one of the more universal experiences that most people can relate to, and it probably impacts kind of how powerful a story is perceived.
You're
Yeah.
exactly right. Because
Yeah.
that grief, it don't discriminate.
Mm-mm.
Mm.
Young, old, woman,
Mm-mm.
man, black, white, transgender, anything. If grief's gonna do the same thing to everybody.
Yes. Yep.
So in switching to um week 6, going back to week 6 about counter counter story. The counter story that I listened to was again about grief and COVID. Um, and I really could feel about like because it the what he was going through, and then again you add on the fact that they're dealing with racism and a pandemic, and so I felt like that he did a great job telling his story, and I kind of related because at one point my parents did live with me, like he moved his parent in. My husband lost his job just like them, so I feel like that the counter stories really help um, get the message across. So, how do you feel like counter stories compared to the dominant narrative?
I listened to that guy's. I can't remember his name, but I listened to that first podcast on counter storytelling. That whole list that we had.
Yeah.
Um, and just I thought it was just really neat to hear his story, his everyday, what he was going through. It was almost like watching a reality show, but listening
Yes.
to it.
I got the same feeling.
Yeah, I got the same, feelings from it or whatever, and just, like hearing his pain about, what he was going through, like not knowing what he was going to do because he lost his job and now had his mother, was it his mother-in-law, his
Yes,
mom?
it was.
Yeah,
You
so it
go
was
you go
just,
from one size and you move, and now all of a sudden you one big family. I had one point, like I had my parents and my grandmother at one point. We had 9 people in our
mm,
house. So it definitely can take a toll.
yeah, yeah, and you could tell he was like scared, like not knowing what was going to happen. So yeah,
Definitely.
but I
I
think the
would,
dominant narrative probably would have said that he's a black man. He wouldn't have been trying to think about taking care of his family. So yeah.
I scoff at that. So, I'm surprised. Yeah. Camryn, did you want to add something?
yeah, thank you. I scrolled down a little bit. I listened to Counter Stories, How to Keep the Movement Going, and that was situated again within 2020 in the BLM movements and protests and stuff. And I guess a couple of things that I pulled from there was the counter perspective and some counter stories of policing. And you have the idea of over policing, where policing in a white community, in a black community, or a Hispanic community, it looks different. Thinking about there's a difference for policing to catch crime and policing to protect is something that the host had said, and that really sat with me because it's the idea of, what does that presence mean for your community and what's the intention of them being there. And one of the hosts shared a story about being pulled over because he's a black man wearing a gray hoodie. And there was a report of two black men stealing radios from cars, and one happened to be wearing a gray hoodie. And, he was stopped with guns drawn and he was outnumbered. And um, as they were leaving, he shared that he said to one officer, something kind of to the effect that his story as like an oral history counter narrative to the heroic depictions of policing was really interesting, and kind of this call for sustained energy for the BLM movement from white people, which I think now we can see has dwindled, maybe not in caring for the cause, but has dwindled in action, I feel, significantly. But it was interesting to hear the perspectives during from the podcast recorded when it was happening. I'd love if they followed up on that now and kind of shared their thoughts, but I liked the ability to pick our podcast that week.
Yeah, me too.
Yes, definitely. So, in thinking and continuing thinking and talking about counter storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
and this time we focus in the curriculum of the LIS. Um, I feel like that the work is really rewarding. Well, first, that's also I definitely agree with Dr. Cook where the work is very rewarding and very tough. I could definitely understand that, especially if you trying to teach a room of if you're an African American woman trying to teach a whole room of white people, or you know, hey, let me teach you about privilege, let me teach you about this, and so I feel like that the work is rewarding and it needs to be done, but I feel like that I could see it leading to some very tough conversations. Um, I that and I feel like that also because counter storytelling is kind of a part of critical race theory. If those three little words get said by,
Mhm.
I feel like those three little words, it doesn't matter if this is the cure to cancer, it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
So, that those 3 little words have become so politically charged to the point where people are spending millions of dollars on attack ads.
Mm.
Um, I mean, outside groups, we have, Camryn, we have a very contentious state superintendent of education election that's
Okay.
going on. We have a seasoned educator that's running from the Democrat side who's actually still in the classroom in Richland too, in Columbia in my children's district. And she's running, and the consensus is even though she's got a big support base, we don't stand a chance.
Mm.
That because we have a woman that recently just got a master's degree, and long story short, she has a lot of outside funding from outside
Mm.
the state, a lot of super PAC money that she will walk away with this election with her eyes closed. And
Mm.
Mm.
so I feel like because counter storytelling, anything, because if people start diving into what it is, um, they'll see critical race theory and immediately it'll be bad.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know how to reframe that any other way. And I don't know how critical race theory could get almost a reboot, as in, hold up, let's go back to the beginning and go over it's not an attack on, you know, air quotes, white people or, non people of color. It's just recognizing, you know, what's going on and what's happened in our past and the, contributions of people, as in on the with the sacrifices of people of color. So that's been on my mind for a while, as in how can we recognize that without, because it's like it's almost like you mention those 3 words and somebody's head's gonna blow up. Combust. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think as and I'm serving as instructor of record for a class next semester, and I think I just went to a CTE session on diversifying your syllabus, and so even though I'm not in the library sciences, I think it's made me think a lot about the curriculum that I want to add. And it is like a textbook based course, but wanting to add kind of those extra materials to read and watch that are from different perspectives, especially because in the article they talked about how 4 types of stories might exist in the curriculum. Sorry, I'm applying the library findings to public health, so I'm trying to make the
Yes.
jump. But like they definitely aren't equally represented, as Dr. Cook noted in that article. And so it's making me think a lot as my first time leading a class how I want different perspectives included and how I want to make sure that's prioritized. So it definitely changed something that I want to put into action more tangibly.
But I didn't know. Well, I've never worked in the library, um, but I didn't know that the profession wasn't diverse. I guess
Mm.
because I was always from the outside, kind of looking in or whatever. And, where I live, like I said, it's like 70%
Mm.
black here. So most of the people that work in the library,
Mhm.
are black. So I didn't know that librarianship wasn't that diverse. But hearing that, it makes me happy that I chose this profession, but I know that'll come
Mhm.
with some challenges as well further down the road. Because, no matter where we go, we're going to be dealing with a diverse community. It's just getting more and more diverse every day. So,
Yes. I feel like that a person that's Caucasian, a non-person of color, I feel like that if you are gonna work in, like, okay, so my school is 99% African American. Um, and I feel like I wouldn't have chosen any different school. Like I said, I've been in this school for years, and I was asked to move into this position. My principal, I'm one of three Caucasian people that work at the school. My
Mhm.
principal said, "You'll be excellent in this position," and she said, "I want to watch you grow it, like you, because I'm a big tech nerd, and she knows, like I said, I have a lot of experience with that, so I am really I'm analyzing my collection for diversified titles. I'm getting local authors to come in. I've
Yeah.
been blogging with, like you said, and doing video conferences, also with diverse authors. And I feel like that every time I do something like that, I learn a little bit about myself. And I wish that as a Caucasian woman, I would just like I wanna just look at some of my Caucasian people and be like, "Look, it's not a threat. Nothing is a threat." I feel like the more we learn about other and celebrate culture and community not, not just use the whole, "Oh, it's not about race." No, that's who we are.
Right.
So I mean, I jokingly say I know more about HBCUs than I do about white ones because because I've learned a lot from my coworkers and my friends and to the point like so I feel like and I wanted to know. I was like, well, why is there an HBCU and why is there this and why is there that? Because I'll just ask questions because I feel
Mhm.
like some people are afraid to ask because they feel like if you ask then you're this or you're that. I was like, I want to
Right.
know. I'm a
Right.
sponge. Give it to me. I feel like that's gonna be make me a better person and a better librarian and a better mother and a better wife and so I felt like that we can learn from each other.
Mhm.
And I just feel like that if I don't know how to get it where like some people just don't feel so threatened. Like, critical race
Yeah.
theory, it's not a bash on white people. It's just the truth. And
Yeah.
it's, it's what happened. It's history. And you can't, the argument is if you can't just like you can't just like the history when it paints your narrative. You have to
Mhm.
recognize all history. So I know I probably went off on a tangent. I'm just saying, I think about this a lot as in how can I make a difference for my students to be, and know that, you know, I don't have, I don't have to say anything or do anything special. I just need to be myself. And I need
Right.
to said, and I felt like that it doesn't need a dog and pony show to advertise this, that, and the other. I'm just doing something that comes naturally. And I want others
Mhm.
to feel that way and not feel threatened.
Right.
So, with our last question, we're coming up on the ending of our me. I'm going to close this up by um, how do you see ethnography utilized in our field? What are some examples? I know it's the scientific description of individuals' cultures and customs. How do you see that it would be utilized in our field as librarians?
I'm sorry I don't have a librarian example, but
Well,
would y'all be
yeah.
okay if I shared a public health one?
Oh, yes, yes. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I recently um got, exposed to one author's work and her name is escaping me right now. I wish I could remember. That's bad. But the core of her work is she does ethnographic research, which is very newly starting to get ingrained in public health, and there's still some different camps on how I'm of the camp I want ethnography in public health. That's kind of the goal is I would love to write one on my research topic area, but the one and she's kind of a newer founder in the field with it. She was looking at the role of farmers in the agricultural industry and exposed some health risks that are gendered because of gender stereotypes. And um, in rural North Carolina, she found she was working on a farm getting ingrained in kind of the customs of the workers there, and those largely employed largely Hispanic workers, and you could see these gender norms playing out in a health risk where they would be measuring pesticides, or sorry, kind of mixing up the pesticide to use for the plants, but because measuring was seen as a female characteristic, or more associated with femininity, um, rather than measuring it, the farmers would just taste the pesticide. Because that it wasn't seen as feminine. And it's kind of like, despite the health risks we know come from farming and exposure to pesticides, how are even the things that maybe you don't see contributing to that, and kind of like bringing in kind of these norms that we see playing out? And I just thought that was so interesting, and we wouldn't have known that, I don't think, without her ethnography. And so I think that there's a place for it, and I think it needs to be valued, and money needs to be funded there. But no, I totally think it has a place in every field.
Yeah, we got some work to do. Sheree,
Mhm.
what you think?
With my work, I'm not a librarian now, but we do a lot of observation with the family culture and family literacy, and like whether or not the child that we're working with is seeing mom read, is seeing dad read,
Mhm.
and how that motivates them to want to learn how to read. So
I
that's
think that's
mine.
excellent
That's
because,
interesting.
yes, because they want to think about it. We want to be like our parents. I mean,
Right.
Mhm.
so our children look up to us. So, of course, if I'm reading and modeling, then my child's going to think, oh, well, my mom's reading all the time. Maybe I need to read. I mean, but
Right.
I feel like that's a good example. Um, And so I know we do a lot with the community. We have a full-time parent family engagement specialist, because our cluster where we're at in the 29203 zip code is got some of the highest poverty in South Carolina. So
Yes.
I feel like it's definitely important to make that model. And with that being said, ladies, our time for today is up.
Thank
So,
you so much for leading, Dawn.
oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
being flexible with my schedule.
Of course. Glad we were able to
I'm gonna
meet.
go ahead and stop the recording.